On this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, we speak with F5 on the importance of concurrency in NFV deployments. Well, thanks for joining us in this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief at RCR Wireless News. In this week's show, we have a featured interview with Misbah Mahoodi, who's the Senior Product Marketing Manager at F5, to discuss the need for more concurrency in NFV deployments. But first, let's take a look at some of the top headlines from across the space over the past week. Well, CenturyLink launched an SD-WAN platform and is tempting enterprise customers to adopt the service through a proof-of-concept program. The SD-WAN platform is said to include site connectivity, equipment, software licensing, configuration, tuning, monitoring, and a management and analytics portal to support software-based centralized control for private networks over any available connectivity method. CenturyLink noted the service can be self-managed, or the operator itself can manage the platform using its own connectivity options or from a range of providers as part of an aggregated solution. In a move to entice enterprise customers, CenturyLink said its free 90-day POC offer includes the delivery of customer premise devices, access to a management portal, and customer support for up to 5 sites. The telecom operator said the platform is currently being piloted by more than 10 enterprises, with commercial availability scheduled for the third quarter. IDC earlier this year forecast the SD-WAN space to reach $6 billion in technology and service sales by 2020, with a compound annual growth rate of more than 90% over the next 5 years. Also this week, a new report from Technology Business Research forecasts the NFV and SDN markets will hit $158 billion by 2021, boosted by early adopters such as AT&T beginning to ramp investments into the NFV and SDN ecosystems. TBR claims the 116% compound annual growth rate will be supported by the redistribution of legacy infrastructure capital expense as operators implement virtualized environments and gradually decommission legacy infrastructure platforms. TBR noted operators could see some external operating expense tied to vendors for maintenance and managed services to support, integrate, and operate software-mediated environments. The report predicts US and European operators will drive 3/4 of the NFV and SDN spend each year through the forecast period, with Asia-Pacific operators expected to increase spending beginning in 2019. Well, for our featured interview this week, we spoke with Misbah Mahoodi, who is the Senior Product Marketing Manager at F5, to discuss the need for more concurrency in NFV deployments. Mahoodi noted expectations for the ability to deploy fully functional applications and services in a secure and reliable environment across different segments is continuing to grow, boosted by the mobile telecom markets moving towards more 5G and IoT implementations. This, in turn, is creating greater demand for concurrency in service provider networks. Let's take a look at the interview now. All right, thanks for joining us this week. This week, we are joined by Misbah Mahoodi, who's the Senior Product Marketing Manager at F5, to talk a bit about the NFV space and also the concurrency issues, perhaps, in NFV deployments. So, Misbah, thanks for joining us this week. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan, for having me.
Great. Well, maybe start off with a little, maybe a little overview and maybe some background on F5 for those who don't know much about the company.
Sure. So F5 has been in the business for several years. We are a market leader in the application delivery controller, so ADCs. And essentially what that is providing load balancing to applications, making them fast, secure, and available. Over the past several years, we have really expanded our footprint into the service provider market. So we have started to develop solutions around the GI LAN, which is essentially the packet between the packet gateway and the internet. Mm-hmm. Those services are typically around like video optimization or TCP optimization, parental control. And we have provided intelligent traffic steering solutions there, policy management type solutions, carrier-grade NAT, as well as firewall solutions. So in general, we're about 20-25% of the total revenues comes out of the service provider market for F5. And we see that growing pretty significantly, especially with virtualization coming to play.
Yeah, very good. And obviously, you guys have a lot of familiarity with the carrier space. I know we've covered you for several years here at RCR, so you guys have a lot of insight there. But yeah, like you said, the virtualization space is kind of like the new, I guess, maybe not the newest buzzword anymore, but it's definitely one of the newer things kind of happening across the telecom and mobile space. I guess, what's your general view of that move towards virtualization? Obviously, NFV and SDN are, we hear them all the time now on all these different shows we go to, and I'm sure you guys are working pretty heavily as well with it. What's your general overall view of kind of this move towards virtualization platforms for telecom operators?
So it's essentially, we as F5 have seen virtualization kind of, even before Etsy started in 2012, right? So if you look back, in 2008, 2009, even when the enterprise side, when the data centers were being virtualized, and the IT guys wanted really to have an agile and dynamic network where they can spin up and spin down different services, we kind of saw that trend already there, and we had anticipated that happening also within the service provider market. So essentially what F5 did was, all the solutions that I just mentioned, all of them we support on purpose-built hardware, but we also virtualize those. So in 2012, when Etsy started coming out with their, the NFV standards, F5 was already well ahead of that game, right? And we already had it in place. And so when we talk to operators, we can say, you know what, if you want to virtualize your networks right now, we have the solutions available. It's built on the same code, and you can easily transition over from hardware to virtualization. Now, what we're seeing with a lot of operators is really around, there's some operators here, especially in North America, where you get the tier 1 operators, who have come out and said, we're going to have 70 to 80% of our networks virtualized, right? So you know who I'm talking about. And then there's some in EMEA, in the APAC, and those guys are probably a mixed bag, right? So some of the bigger ones, like the BTs and the Telefonicas, they already announced their intent and moving over to NFV. Some of the other operators are a little bit more laggard, and they're kind of adopting more of a wait and see method, where they're trying to figure out exactly what benefit is NFV really going to bring to me. And so part of our job is to really help the operators understand what is the real value proposition for NFV going forward.
Yeah, that's a good point too. It does seem like, when I've talked to a lot of vendors on the show, a lot of them have kind of been in this space for a while. I mean, obviously you guys were dealing, like you said, with data center customers and the IT space for a long time. And so it does seem like there is a lot of at least history when it comes to work on virtualization. Again, now it's just the telecom guys now kind of getting up to speed with it, it seems like. So yeah, it doesn't seem like it's a huge challenge, I'm guessing, for you guys to kind of cater more towards this. And obviously it's just a little more resources, but it seems like you guys at least have some history and some familiarity with the platforms themselves.
Yeah, we do. And so, when we look at NFV, we're looking at it as out of 5, we provide VNFs, right? Virtual network functions. So we're taking all of our existing platforms that we have today, the policy management, the firewall, the traffic steering, the ADCs, and we're virtualizing those, and we're providing, the VNFs. And then what we are doing is we provide open APIs upwards, northbound facing, so that we can actually then integrate with third-party management and orchestration systems. And if you look at that kind of model is exactly where operators are trying to move to, where they're trying to move away from vendor lock-in, where they have specific components, and it's also tied then into their management system, right? So by opening it up and giving the operators the freedom to choose, whatever type of management and orchestration system they have, whether it's a legacy one or whether they're investing in a new one, so be it. And then for us, they can easily plug in our VNFs as they need to. And so we're starting to see where the real value proposition is really coming around the fact that they can easily spin up and spin down new services, and really adopt this kind of a fail fast mode, right? When you look at it, operators are trying to figure out what are the right services that they want to offer their subscribers, their enterprise customers. And so they're always churning and trying to figure out what is the best type of service that they want to offer. And with NFV, it gives them that opportunity where they can quickly ramp up a new service, try it out. If it works, great. If it doesn't, then they can, spin up a new service. And that's really what we're seeing as kind of the real advantages for NFV.
Yeah, well, I guess a lot of that is also predicated on kind of this open source architecture too. I mean, that does seem to be kind of this big push when it comes to virtualization is, various open source type of initiatives coming along there too. I guess, how do you view the movement towards more of this open community? Has it been helping? Has there been challenges there? Because it does seem like that is it's a somewhat of a new model for a lot of the telecom vendors out there. I mean, a lot of them that were based in hardware in the past tend to have a lot of proprietary information or at least proprietary systems. I guess it's moved towards more of an open community. How has that been, I guess, how do you guys work through that process?
We're working with all the open source communities, and just a couple of weeks ago at OpenStack, F5 was there and had a huge presence, and we had some really great conversations with the tier 1 operators there who are also moving, using OpenStack and other type of open source software, and we're seeing that kind of shift moving towards it too. Mm-hmm. Now the challenge is going to be is this good for trials? Is it good for POCs, or is it good for actual deployments? There's some enterprises, some operators that are saying, you know what, we're going to use OpenStack and we're going to productize it. And then again, there's some that are going to be more of a wait and see and trying to figure out exactly if it benefits them or not. Yeah,
that's a good point. I know I've talked to a lot of analysts about this, and that's been kind of their point is, if these operators want to move relatively quickly into the space, they might have to look at maybe something that's not as open source as perhaps they want, but it will allow them to kind of roll the stuff out quickly and probably a little more, probably fewer issues with it, as opposed to kind of moving towards more of an open community. So it does seem like that's still kind of a bit of a challenge, is how quick do operators want to move on this? And if they want to move really quick, which, like you mentioned earlier, a lot of operators are moving pretty aggressively in the space, some of those initial deployments might be perhaps a little more proprietary in nature in some parts, as opposed to maybe what they're looking for down the road.
Yeah, I would agree there. Yeah.
Well, one thing I know I definitely want to touch base with you on was, I guess this concurrency issue, and that's something that I think I've seen the topic a few times, but never really dealt much with it. And obviously, you guys, bringing up the topic, I think it would be great to get some insight from you on maybe what you guys see as the challenge when it comes to concurrency, I guess, in NFV deployments. Maybe start off with what your view of that topic is.
So what we mean is really around performance, right? So from an operator's perspective, they are seeing this huge growth in mobile subscribers. They're seeing a huge growth in the types of data applications traversing through their network. Video being probably the number one application being used within operators' networks. And then you have this whole thing around the Internet of Things, where you have wearables, you have smart cars, smart houses. I was listening to this other article, reading another article, where they were saying that by 2020, there's going to be, on an average household of 4 people, there will be about 50 to 60 devices in that house. Can you imagine that? And if you just multiply that out between all the different households that an operator has to handle, you're looking at 50 billion devices being supported by 2020. And so the operators really have to figure out is, how am I going to support this? How am I going to have so many different devices, coming into my network? How am I going to support the scale of it? And if you look at it, these devices, where it's traditional, you connect and they have long connection rates. These smart devices, they're constantly pinging the network, and they're very short-lived connections, right? But there are thousands of them happening all the time. And so from an operator's perspective, they need to figure out, how am I going to scale out my network to be able to handle the concurrent connections and the connections per second? And from an F5 perspective, we look at that and see that as a challenge that we need to address as an industry in whole. And so from our perspective, we've got our platforms, whether it's purpose-built or even on the virtualization, where we can actually then scale out to meet those requirements, right? So being able to scale out to support billions of concurrent connections, or how many connections per second that you need to scale out, I think that's a very important aspect. It's not quite there yet with virtualization, meaning on purpose-built hardware. I think you can get there, and we're showing that right now with NFV, and I think that's one of the challenges. Even working with the latest hardware, chip manufacturers and so forth, trying to get to that space where you can now support the number of devices that are coming into the network.
I guess so then, what's the holdup in getting that spot? Is it the technology behind it? I mean, what's, I guess, holding up this movement to allow operators to really have that kind of scalability in the network? Because again, like you said, there's so many things out there now that want to connect to the networks, and whether it's quick pinging or video, which are kind of the two opposite ends of things. I guess how can what's holding up operators from and the vendors from being able to kind of, I guess, serve that part of the market?
A lot of it is really around the technology, right? So you've got all these open, commercial off-the-shelf hardware vendors we're coming out, and they are, meaning over the past several years, we have seen significant improvements in terms of how much throughput and how much connections you can get on a virtualized solution. And so we're starting to see equivalency between what you could traditionally get on purpose-built hardware versus what you could get on a virtualized solution. But I don't think it's at par yet. I think there's still a little bit of a gap there. And so, when we talk to operators, we really talk to them about how you can actually support a hybrid architecture in a sense of there's going to be certain elements in your network that still require a high throughput or supporting the millions of connections per second. And for that, you really probably, at least today, continue on with purpose-built hardware. Now, there's other use cases where you may want to actually move over and virtualize. For example, virtualizing CPE, the customer premise equipment. That's kind of like the perfect example. And we're seeing a lot of traction within our customers in terms of what they're looking at virtualizing. They're looking at virtualizing the GI LAN or virtualizing the IMS core. And so those areas we're looking at and saying maybe if those aren't the performance requirements that's required for virtualization, then virtualize those first, and then as the technology kind of catches up, then you can start moving and migrating your whole network over to a completely virtualized environment.
Well, I guess looking at that I guess those challenges, I mean, like an operator, for instance, like AT&T or whoever it's going to be, who is making kind of these large movements, or at least talking about their plans to virtualize 80%, 75% of their network by 2020. I mean, is that a daunting task? Because it does seem like being able to at least have parity with what's out there already, and ideally have better performance than what's out there ideally, is kind of what the end goal is for all of this. If we're still trying to get just even to parity at this point, I mean, is the market, is the technology, are the vendors, do you think, going to be able to kind of, I guess, get that sort of performance out of these virtualized platforms in that sort of time frame to meet what these operators are trying to do, or are they kind of just setting one of those goals out there that perhaps we might not meet exactly, but at least it gets the industry moving pretty aggressively towards that target?
Yeah, I think they are aggressive, and all power to them for kind of setting those goals. What you got to keep in mind though is when they say 80% of the network needs to be virtualized, it's 80% of what can be virtualized will be virtualized, right? Yeah. So they understand that, and they understand that there's going to be certain components today that will continue to be on purpose-built hardware, and then there's other things. As soon as the technology catches up to them, we will see that transition over. Now, there are technologies today, and there's ways that we can actually help improve that, right? So, for example, there's different ways that we can actually scale out VNFs, right, through like horizontal scaling. We basically, scaling out the VNFs horizontally, and that allows the operators then to achieve their performance goals and achieve the throughput and performance that they're looking for. So there are ways that we're working on right now in lieu of where the technology is today to help get to the operator where they want to. And then as as these chipset manufacturers, as the COTS hardware manufacturers, as the technology ramps up, and it is ramping up in an exponential space, as they do that, then you will see the kind of the parity between purpose-built and NFV solutions.
Yeah, that's a good point too, because it does seem like there are platforms, there are services that are, in a virtualized environment that are working quite well out there. It seems like it does seem like that there are certain segments, like you said, the virtual CPE, for instance, that's a great, start for this. It does seem like those are ready to kind of really be in a commercial environment at this point, but perhaps operators aren't quite at a comfort level, maybe, when it comes to deploying those. Is that still kind of a challenge to kind of make sure the operators do have a certain comfort level? Because telecom in general has, a certain history of resiliency, of network requirements, the 5 nines model that they try to stick with. And perhaps in the virtualized world, maybe 5 nines is not quite the ideal anymore. Maybe 4 nines, 3 nines might work too. Is it still a matter of just getting everybody kind of comfortable with what's out there now, so they can start rolling these out and getting a level of comfort with them, and then they can kind of build on that and move farther and further down the road with virtualization?
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's something that when we discuss this with operators, so one of the other biggest challenges, aside from technology, is kind of the human aspects, or the human resources aspects of it, right? So, the way I look at it is, you had your traditional network guys who had their boxes, and they knew that the green light was flashing or the red light was flashing, and they knew exactly what to do with it, right? Meaning those were guys that were, my focus is on security solutions, and this is my security box, and I know exactly how it's going to work. Or my focus is on, policy management, and I know exactly how this box is going to work. If it goes down, I have the mobs in place to be able to figure out exactly how I'm going to fix it, right? Now you're trying to move that over to an IT environment. And so the network guys are saying, I'm not sure if you really understand how security works, or how policy, or how all these core network elements work in the network. And the IT guys are like, well, you know what, we're going to take control, and we're going to have everything built on COTS hardware, and everything is going to be virtualized, and it's all going to be software driven. So we can instantiate new services as required. And so we're seeing that battle happening a lot with the service providers, as well as how much control are the network guys willing to give to IT, and vice versa. So you see that as a challenge. And then there's obviously, how are you going to monetize it? And so how are you going to monetize virtualization solutions? Initially, as I mentioned, NFV kind of came out and it was talking about how we can actually reduce CapEx and OpEx. But really, the real benefits and real value proposition for NFV is really around that service agility, being able to have this flexible network where I can then spin up and spin down new services as required. And so the way to do that then is, okay, what are kind of the easy pickings from a network perspective? And as I mentioned, probably the biggest use case that we're seeing right now is the virtual CPE, where it's a very easy model. If you look at the ROI, just the fact that you can eliminate truck rolls, you can eliminate how long it takes to actually provision a new service. That in itself is a huge factor for operators to kind of be convinced that this is kind of the first use case going forward.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I know you mentioned earlier the fact that we are going to be in an environment where it's going to be perhaps a lot of hybrid type of networks out there for a while. But that does seem to be a bit of maybe a financial challenge for operators, because that's almost like a worst case scenario for them, because they're having to operate basically two networks when they ideally only want to have one operation basically, instead of having two out there. But again, I think we all know that there is going to be this time frame where there will be kind of both sides kind of operating. I guess, is that a challenge to kind of obviously recognize and adapt to this hybrid environment, but also realizing that you can't stay in this hybrid environment forever, because again, you do want to at some point turn off one and just rely on the other. Is that more maybe down the road a little bit, or I guess how do you view getting past that bit of a challenge?
Yeah, so we actually see that as kind of a best of both worlds kind of approach, right? And when you have a hybrid architecture, especially on solutions where, and it's really up to the vendor community to kind of explain this to the operators. If you have the same code base like F5 does for both purpose-built and virtual, it really makes it easy to have that transition from purpose-built to virtualization, right? So they don't really have to manage two separate networks. It's kind of almost all the same network, in terms of functionality, how it's going to work, in terms of how you're going to actually turn up a new service. All of those features or those functions are all going to be the same. And so what that does is it allows the operator to kind of dip their toes in and say, yep, this type of solution works perfectly for me. And you know what, now that I've proven it and it works and I can take advantage of it, then I'll start turning off the purpose-built hardwares and seamlessly migrate over to a virtual appliance. So for us, we're seeing that as kind of the reality, and it's more of an advantage that we kind of position with the operators to say, building out a hybrid network architecture is probably your best bet. And then also, as long as you have the same kind of APIs that plug into the same management and orchestration system, that makes it also easier for operators then, because now, that same Mano system that they had that was managing, the hardware is now also managing the virtual systems as well. And that helps operators make that transition and makes it smoother for them, as opposed to having to deal with two separate networks.
Got it. So hybrid is not a bad thing in this instance then.
No, we think it's a great thing.
It's a good thing. Okay.
It really helps the operators make that transition over, because at the end of the day, aside from some of those other operators, they cannot turn off or completely shut down their network right away, right? So that having that transition phase is probably the best thing for them.
Yeah, and it seems like too the carriers that are really moving aggressively into the space are the larger guys, and they're the ones who are probably going to have the biggest challenge when it comes to if they ever want to turn off one side or the other, they would have the hardest time doing that just because they have so many. I mean, their operations are so vast that I guess for them, obviously a hybrid environment is going to be a pretty common way that they're going to have to just move down the road. That's just be a big part of their operations.
Yeah, exactly. What we're also seeing with operators is really around where for example. Dealing with IoT, right? Mm-hmm. So we've seen a lot of operators that may start off with almost like a greenfield environment, right? So for M2M, for IoT, they'll actually start off this network and then have that all virtualized. And so what that allows them to do is, work out any of the issues that they may have had from a virtualization perspective, try it out and see, ensure that everything works as needed. And once that's kind of proven itself, then you can start moving over your subscribers over to the network. So we're starting to see a lot of that as well with some of the operators, especially in Europe and EMEA parts.
Yeah, that kind of brings up the whole timing aspect too, because it does seem like that the timing of these virtualized rollouts, IoT, 5G, whatever else, all these different things, all seem to be kind of coming in a very similar type of time frame. And the thing is that they're all kind of reliant on having a virtualized platform out there. I mean, you really can't take full advantage of IoT. Like we said earlier, with all those devices connected to the network, unless you have some sort of software automated control over what's happening there. And same with 5G even. I mean, to be able to kind of bring in various different spectrum bands and different technologies and access methods, you have to have something behind the scenes that can make all this happen seamlessly. And not that humans can't, but sometimes it's a little easier, maybe a little quicker to have some sort of automation in place, which obviously on a virtualized platform to make all that work seamlessly, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's what we're seeing too. And when we talk to operators, that's exactly their plan is, right? For IoT, for 5G networks, as they're starting to evolve their network architectures over to 5G, they need to really think about, okay, what am I going to do around the automation and the management of all the different devices in my network? How am I actually going to control it? And having it where it's fully automated, in the sense of, we talk about this and it's a bit probably far out, but having this network where it really allows you to figure out, especially in different parts of the network, right, where it actually gives you alarms and analytics and visibility into the network to figure out, well, I'm starting to see the sporting event come up and there's a lot of traffic that's starting to hit my network. What am I going to do? And then, applying that to the orchestration system and saying, you need to spin up new instances of, policy or new instances of a security solution or whatnot. And then, once that sporting event's done, is over, being able to then spin down those services. So we're seeing, a lot of customers talk to us about, how can I provide or how can I get visibility and some of the analytics that allows me to then to make intelligent decisions about what I want to do in my network.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, definitely all the use cases that have been brought up on this, it does seem like, they do seem like they're a bit, like you said, a little bit out there in terms of timing on them, but these are things that, seem like they could happen. I mean, this is not, we're not guessing on these things. It seems like they're pretty relevant use cases that are going to be happening, pretty much going forward. It's kind of what we should expect really on the networks out there.
Yeah, this is, we're talking about operators day in and day out. Mm-hmm. And even some of these other ones that may seem a little far out, it's already on top of mind for a lot of these operators. And they're trying to figure out exactly how to actually position themselves and how to actually select the vendors to help them actually make that transition over, especially for 5G and IoT. As you probably met, where at Mobile World Congress this past year, a lot of the talk was around how am I going to move my networks to support IoT and 5G. And even though those are going to be out in like 2020 and beyond, they're already starting to prepare for it. And us as a vendor, we really need to be kind of ahead of the game and kind of tell our story and help them virtualize and help them evolve the network architectures over to 5G and IoT.
Yeah, essentially, yeah, it did seem like the Mobile World Congress 2015 was all about virtualization, and then this year was all about, like you said, IoT and 5G. But they're all things that obviously need to be in place for the others to work. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. But
Exactly.
Misbah, we definitely appreciate the great insight on this today. Obviously, it's a whole new world out there. Things are changing rather rapidly. I know you guys have been in the space for a while, so you guys have been kind of rolling with it as it's kind of been going along. But definitely very interesting what's happening out there. But we definitely appreciate the great insight on the topic today. Thanks so much for that. Well, thanks for watching this week's show, and make sure to check us out again next week when we are scheduled to speak with RedAssist for a deeper look into the Cord and M-Cord initiatives. Thanks for watching.
NFV SDN Reality Check with Dan Meyer is a production of RCR TV. To suggest show topics or to reach Dan, you can find him on email, dmeyer@rcrwireless.com, and on Twitter @Meyer_Dan. For more Dan, news on NFV SDN, and everything wireless, find your way over to rcrwireless.com.